Welcome, everyone, to the Single Malt Strategy Podcast, episode number 76. Today, we'll be doing a review of 2022. And as usual, I'm joined by the host, the historical gamer, Matt. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing good. It's nice to outsource the busy work of hosting to you, let you do the intros and all of that.
Yeah, we really fought over it this time, as in, who wouldn't do it? And today, we're also joined by... we have back, I guess it's the second time you've been on the podcast, DasTactic. Welcome, Das.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, looking forward to the discussion. It's sort of one of these, it's been an incredible year for gaming. So, really interested to sort of see what you guys have thought of the year and what your list of games actually is.
Yeah, we have a long list of games to go through since we're trying to cover the entire year. And 2022 was a lot better year than the last two. But first, let's start off with our usual segment, maybe an abbreviated version of it. What have you been playing lately? THG? What have you been playing lately?
Most recently, strangely enough, I've been playing Oregon Trail. They have a new version of Oregon Trail out on Steam and Switch and whatnot. And my wife likes to watch me play certain games or whatnot. It's kind of like a relaxing thing or whatnot if we're just sort of winding down. And I saw it on the Switch, so I picked it up and I was playing it on the Switch. And then I needed to do some streaming for thing I was doing, and I needed to find a game to play it, and it seemed like a really interesting kind of fun little game to play that's pretty interactive with like your audience. Not like my typical kind of a game that I'll play on my channel, but I had a lot of fun with it. It's made by Gameloft. They're primarily a mobile game developer, and so you do see elements of that where it's like this feels a little optimized for iOS or whatnot. Not quite all of the depth that like Oregon Trail 2 had, which was the game I played in my youth. But it's a fun recreation of the old classic, if you will.
Actually, if I can just butt in there, I've never played it, but I thought that was like a really, really old game. So is that actually, are you playing, like, is there a new version of that one? I know that it's sort of considered one of the classic games, but it's a game that I would never even put on my radar at this point in time, and I don't know why. But I've seen it, and I just wondered if it's is it a remaster of it?
I would say it's a recreation of it. It's not like, other than the loading screen, which uses that sort of green Apple II sort of look of the really old version, the original version, which I believe was on Apple II. It looks modern in every sense. So like I didn't play a lot of Oregon Trail 3. But it feels a little bit more like Oregon Trail 3 and sort of the aesthetics and the approach to the game. I played 2 a lot, which was like, hey, we're going to do Oregon Trail in Windows and we're going to have full motion videos with actors and stuff. And that was the one I played the most. But I liked that one the most because it had the largest variety of like items. It wasn't just like meat or fruit. It was like you had sugar, you had salt, you had different type. I think you had like different types of, either rifle ammo or shotgun ammo, or like it was a much more detailed version of Oregon Trail, if my memory is accurate at all. And so that's what I really enjoyed about 2. But this is very much sort of like, hey, it's Oregon Trail, but it's made new and certainly with sort of a mobile bend to it. But it plays well on PC. It plays well on Switch, and so I enjoy it.
Is that like Vagarous? Like I think that's the name that I'm thinking of. I've never played it, but that's like from what I can sort of see, you sort of go through like a random map and pick different things up sort of procedurally.
I don't think it's procedural at all. I mean, maybe like some of the waypoints and stuff like that, but like the actual trail is it's the same route each time. There's definitely a heavy amount of RNG in it in terms of like what happens to you and things like that along the trail. But the actual path, the destinations, that's all the same.
Oh, okay. Yep. Yeah. I wonder also if it's sort of one of those games that if you're not from the United States, it's got a diminished interest for you, like because it is referring to, I guess, the expansion into the West in the United States, whereas other countries, it's not really known that well here in Australia.
Yeah, no, it would probably be less culturally significant, I would say, if you weren't an American. I will say also it's, the original game I think had like just the one trail. I know Oregon Trail 2 had a couple of different destinations, but it was always still sort of that dependence to some place in Oregon. But in this, they also have like 14 different journeys, if you will. So I know like one of them is like the California Trail for during the California Gold Rush, and a couple of different journeys. So it's a little bit more varied. But I would say that's the main thing I've been playing. I haven't. I've been dealing with a cold for like the last 3 weeks that my daughter gave my wife and I, and we both have been like completely out of commission. So the channel's not had a lot of stuff on it because my voice has been either gone for a period of that or just like so congested that it just was miserable to try and play or record or any of that. So that's kind of been the main thing I've been playing. What about you, Das? What have you been up to?
Like as in recent times, it's sort of funny because I've been like there's so many games at time of recording. We've got like a whole lot of games that are actually coming out over the next week and a half. And my time over the last probably 6 weeks has been spent testing a lot of these games and really getting into them, like particularly Master of Magic. I've spent a lot of time with that game. And now I've sort of hit like an embargo stage right at this very, very point in time where I can't show Master of Magic for a few weeks. And so I've actually gone back to Age of Wonders 3 and started to stream that a little bit just in very recent days, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. It's still a fantastic game. It's still probably, in my opinion, the best Fantasy 4X game that's been made so far. And I feel, and I don't know for 100%, but I feel that Triumph Studios may be starting to do some work on potentially an Age of Wonders 4. So not that that's an announcement in any sort of sense. I've got no actual information other than just looking at their website and seeing who they're hiring and things like that. It looks like there could be an Age of Wonders 4 on the cards, which I would be thoroughly enjoy, because I think Planetfall was an incredible game, and if they can take the mechanics of Planetfall back into an Age of Wonders fantasy game, God, that would just be the best Fantasy 4X of all time, I think.
Well, it's you're actually a real sleuth then. You do some real detective work, actually monitoring like the hiring practices of companies. I mean, that's much more involved than I've ever been. That's pretty good, Das.
It is. Look, it's one of those things where it's my favorite series of games. It's been my favorite series of games since that first came out, in the 1990s, late 1990s. So I've loved I loved the first game. I've loved every iteration of the game, and Planetfall I love as well. Like, I think that's an exceptional game, and I know that they've been hiring at the moment. They're hiring interns, but they're hiring interns with interns to help with fantasy character creation. So that's got to be Age of Wonders 4. It just has to be.
I thought you were going to say like interns with at least 10 years of experience, and it's unpaid.
Well, I did try to milk the information out of Paradox. I did actually contact them to ask for some information about it, and I also tried to give some feedback because I actually hate the random number generator that's been used in the combat in Planetfall. I love it in Age of Wonders 3, but Planetfall was a real step backwards, and I just was hoping that if they are building it, to at least get some feedback on how to actually handle random number generation in games. And Planetfall, that's the only bad thing about Planetfall. And so I gave that feedback across just in the hope that they were making an Age of Wonders 4. But they didn't give me any clues.
I don't want to push us too deep into this topic, but like a random number generation and the way RNG works in games is like a huge focus for me. It's always been something that I'm very interested in. Can you just maybe mention a little bit why you don't think the Planetfall RNG is good?
Yeah, there's a lot of games that actually use this sort of method that Planetfall, and I don't know why they went to this sort of method. It's sort of almost like it's too broad. The actual the damage factors, like the 2-hit. You've got to get a 2-hit before you get like essentially sort of like a hit itself. So you can score a complete miss through to something that's going to be a critical shot sort of with a kill. I much prefer to have numbers that are much more where you can sort of at least plan a little bit, so that you're thinking, okay, look, at the random number generation is maybe within a factor of say 20% of the total amount, like plus or minus 10% of the expected actual damage that you would then sort of do. That's the way I would prefer to be playing. The game that I think does the absolute best job of this, and I hadn't seen it until this came out in this game, was Panzer Corps 2. And what they do is they have actually got a slider where you slide from 100% no random number generation through to 0% back to where it's full random number generation, and the default is 50-50, and you don't notice it. But if you did notice it, you can tweak it exactly where you want it, and that's for me, would be the absolute ideal random number generation method for combat in pretty much any game, to be honest. I think it's just such a brilliant idea. The other game that really shits me off with random number generation, and it sort of stops me from playing it occasionally, except now I found a mod for it, is the Battle for Westnoth. And that was a game that used to just drive me nuts with the random number generation. But I have found a mod that actually takes the random number generation out of the equation and replaces it with with an actual, so you can calculate essentially what your damage is going to be. And I much prefer it. It makes the game much more happy for me.
That's really interesting. We might be kind of revisiting that later when I talk about one of my games from 2022, but we'll defer some of that until the meat of the conversation. I'll just say that I have been playing one of the games that I have been super addicted to. I've also been getting over a cold, and when I couldn't record, it was kind of like a blissful honeymoon period where I could just play games for fun, which is, something that the three of us we're kind of recording focused at this point and, doing content for press and all this. And the game I was playing is Medieval Dynasty, and it's like first person Banished. I love the hell out of it. I probably put in way too many hours. I think it's a great game. I'd recommend it to anybody who likes the survival category, but also likes the management side of things.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't heard of it either until I just saw Avic, I think, streaming it. And I was like, I haven't played I've been kind of itching for a survival game. And I started to look at Vintage Story, which is like a Minecraft knockoff. It's actually a mod from Minecraft that they turned into a separate game. But this ended up being even better just because it's, it has that management side of it where you can like hire villagers and then you can actually have them get the food for you. So it turns into like really truly turns into like a Banished type game at the end of it, which I don't know. I think it's great. So I've been super addicted to that.
I had one other game I actually should have mentioned when I said like what I've been playing, and it was brief, but it was really exciting to get a chance to do it. And it's a game that's not out yet. It's called The Great War Western Front. It's an upcoming game being developed by Petroglyph Games. And they invited me to participate in some kind of it's like Frontier Foundry, their publisher, kind of had like a little mini convention, like a digital convention type deal, where they were showing a couple of their different games, and I got a chance to play The Great War Western Front, which is an upcoming strategy and tactical war game, which was really exciting to see. It looks like it's a game that has sort of a strategic layer where you move units around like on the Western Front, and then when you launch offensives or offensives are launched against you, then you fight a battle in like an RTS kind of battlefield. And for the thing they were doing, I got to play. They have, I think it was like 6 or 7 different historical battles will be part of the game, and they brought us in digitally, if you will, and I was able to play the second battle of Passchendaele, which was a lot of fun. Like I had done a video about sort of the announcement of this game, and I thought this looks interesting. But then when I actually got a chance to play it, it was profoundly exciting, like using rolling barrages to cover your troops as they cross no man's land, so they've got cover, using artillery to take out particular like pinpoint spots on the map, watching your men get mown down when your barrage lifts and they have no cover and they're stuck in no man's land. It was a lot of fun. And it'll be interesting to see how they try and marry sort of the strategic and tactical layer, because this is obviously a more sort of curated experience, given it was modeled after a historical battle, as opposed to what you'll see when you have the campaign, which will have a lot of presumably more like procedurally generated battles. But it was a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to see how that game plays out. And when we do our episode on what you're most excited about for 2023 Tortuga, I'm pretty sure it'll be on that. And I only got to play for 2 hours, and I just like at the end of that, I was just like, oh my God, like I want to play more of this.
But what sort of like when you started describing it, I was sort of imagining like almost like a tile game, like a war game sort of style thing. But it actually sounds very different to that. Is it actually like a fully 3D Is it more like Total War, but for World War One, or is it?
Yeah, kind of. Like, I don't know if it's 3D or 2D. I didn't zoom in that much. Like, it could be like sprites, but I think it's probably 3D.
Oh, okay. Yep.
They didn't show. We didn't get a chance to play the campaign portion of the game. I've just seen like the trailer stuff they've put out there, so that looks more like Total War-y or maybe like Grand Tactician-y, where you've got like the big strategic map with the different units placed along the front line. And I can, as far as you can see from the trailer, like you manage resources, you manage R&D, those kind of things. But then what they allowed us to play, they have a certain number of historical battles where like the map is already created for you. It's based on the historical battle. And whatnot, like the key strong points, I believe, are like historical key strong points and stuff like that.
Is it a game that you need to have like fast reflexes, or is it a game that you can actually? Is it pausable? Is it active pausable? I guess would be the way I would be. Like a game like that sounds interesting, but for me, if it wasn't active pausable and it had real time battles, I would completely not play it.
So it didn't feel twitchy to me. Timing and coordination is really important, like to make sure that that barrage drops at the right time so that your troops aren't stranded in no man's land. I don't remember if you can issue orders when it's fully paused, but you can slow down to less than ×1 speed and issue orders at like a reduced speed, or you can speed time up, from my recollection with it. And so like it didn't feel overwhelmingly like clickfesty. But it was really interesting because I found myself trying to figure out, all right, how do I take out these strong points in the trench? What's the right path to get across no man's land so I can take this trench line? Once I take that trench line, like it was a little bit Ultimate generally where like then it kind of zoomed out and you had to take the next line of trenches. But again, it was because it was like a historical battle as opposed to I don't know how the campaign will play with that. But it was really interesting. And you know, I wish I had more in depth to say, but it was a very limited preview that I got to play. All I can say is like when I came away from that, I was like, that's really cool. Like I can't remember another war game where I had to use artillery to put down a shield in front of my troops as they moved across no man's land, right? Usually you bombard, but like you don't, I feel like rolling barrages aren't a thing so much in most war games. And I think that it's certainly fitting for the Great War. I know there's going to be chemical weapons. There are barrage balloons that you can use to like, it influences your line of sight on the enemy trenches. So like if your balloons are up, you can see into the enemy lines, but they can use air units to take out your balloons. And it was a really interesting preview and certainly something that made me go from like, oh, this is kind of mildly interesting to wow, I'm legitimately really excited about this.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny you mentioned the World War I aeroplanes. I saw there was a game that came. I saw it come up in my Steam library called the Red Baron. I thought, oh, great! They've finally made a World War One fighter, like fighters and bombers type thing a game, but it wasn't. It was part of another space game, and so the Red Baron was just a DLC for that. Anyway, it's a bit of an aside.
What? Because there was an old Red Baron flight sim game way back in the day, but I can't imagine that being a space game.
Yeah, that was awesome, that game. No, this was. I think they just called their new DLC the Red Baron, and it's like, and I got attracted by the name and thought, oh, great, they've remade this game or they've made a game like it, and but it wasn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was going to say that's very effective marketing. Whoever titled that DLC, it's really grabbing attention.
Yeah, but I'm in the wrong market for it, but I'm the right market for the Red Baron.
Okay, well, I think let's dive into our review of 2022 then. And the way we kind of decided to loosely structure this is that we'll start with our top 3 games in reverse order. I have to say, it might be the same for you guys. Mine's not a very strict top 3. I kind of had to quickly compartmentalize one into an ordering, which I reserve the right to disagree with myself on a separate day. But yeah, we'll go from 3 to 2 to 1, and then we'll go to like the mosh pit free for all where we discuss a bunch of other games that didn't get covered. Because yeah, 2022 was a pretty busy year.
It's a point. Sorry, I just wanted to maybe before we start, I hope you don't mind me sort of hijacking this bit of it, but where does 2022 sit for you guys in terms of like if you had to rate the years, going right back to the 1990s? How does it rate? Like, does it, for me, I've got to say, I don't think there's been a better year for gaming since the 1990s. So for me, this has been the best strategy gaming year, I guess, that there's been since the heyday of the incredible times of microprose when they were sort of bringing out Master of Orion and games like that.
I think I can say that I almost can't answer because I have done such a good job with my own expectations management, which I wasn't so good at because maybe I didn't even need to be some 20 years ago or whatever. So I don't think if I try to look at it objectively, this year is laden with good games. But I remember being super excited, for example, about the release of World of Warcraft. You can imagine that was a long time ago, and a much younger Tortuga spending way too many hours on that game. But yeah, I mean, so now because maybe the last 2 years has so tempered me to not have good expectations.
Yeah. But hasn't this been a surprisingly good year? It's been incredible. I've found, I feel so happy with what's come out this year. I feel in one sense, I feel a bit sorry for some of the developers that bring out these incredible games that are competing against these other incredible games. It feels like another golden era this particular year.
Well, I agree. I think it's a very good game. I mean, what do you think, Tishi?
I don't know. So I don't know if this is because so 2021 for me, the first half was an incredible and busy year because of CK3 had come out, was it late 2020? So I was playing the heck out of that in the first half of the year. I think War on the Sea came out last year. There was a lot of stuff that came out sort of front loaded last year and I played a bunch of, and then our daughter was born in May. And so the rest of that year was crapshoot for me. I don't know. And I'm trying to figure out if my opinion on this year is more based on where I am in my life right now, or if it's a legitimate criticism. And what I would say is, to me, 2022 felt like an incredibly busy year for strategy games. I don't know that I would say it was a great year.
I think also with where you are, though, I think when you've actually got a young baby, that really does change your perspective and also changes your what you can focus on. So that's going to be it's going to make whatever year you're actually in quite a it's going to change the perspective, I would think, in that sort of sense. I mean, I'm a first time grandfather this year as well, and I not that my daughter doesn't live with us, but her and her family basically, I know that they can't focus on anything that requires very much brain power for any length of time just because of the baby. So I would imagine that would be quite hard in your perspective in terms of being, I guess, open to being able to sort of play complex games.
Yeah, and I will say that, I've told this to you, Tortuga, I don't have the headspace to learn that game right now, right? There have been games that have come out where I want to dedicate more time to it, but I'm too freaking tired or whatever. But on the same point, though, I don't know. To me, and again, it could just be a reflection of where I'm at in my life right now, but it feels like a really busy year. I don't know if I'd say it's a great year, and I'll leave it there because that'll get, when we get to our lists, I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, all right. I think I said a little bit in the middle of you two. Probably I'm closer to Das. I think it was a very good year, but. All right, so because I am the prestigious co-host, of course, I am going to designate Das. Das, why don't you start with number 3 for you?
Yeah, as you say, it's sort of hard to choose one game. And the game that I would choose at this point in time, I've got 3 games that I've been looking forward to this year, and they haven't disappointed at all. The number 3 for me, and by the time this podcast comes out, the game will have been launched, and that's Master of Magic, the remake. Muha Games is the developer of the game. They're the developers of the Thea games. Really inspired choice by Slytherin to actually appoint Muha Games as a developer. The game is, I'm so taken by it. It's still not as good, in my opinion, as Age of Wonders 3. So it's still not quite to that point, but I like to have pretty complex tactical battles. Whereas Master of Magic, what I like about it is I think it's going to actually open the Fantasy 4X genre up to a lot of gamers who don't want to be investing in a complex tactical game. They want something that they can just get into and enjoy. And I think that Master of Magic, even it does have complexity. It's got a lot of immersion in it as well, but it does have a pretty low barrier to entry to play it. And I really appreciate what they've done with the game. They've kept it so true to the original in so many ways, but then they've just made these little improvements. Like, for example, they've brought in hexes rather than tiles. The game works better, much better in hexes than it does in tiles, as do all games. I'm only joking about that, of course, but it's but in this sense, the original tiles really, if hexes had been really a gaming thing back then they probably would have made it in hexes, so that's good. And they've also doubled the movement speed of the units at the start. Plus, they've made a whole lot of other little sort of tweaks and changes without really that you can't really put your finger on, but it just feels good. It feels modern. It doesn't feel like an old 1990s game, yet it's so true to that same sort of gaming style and gaming feel. But for me, the thing I love about it is that low barrier to entry for newish players. Like, you can sort of pick it up. It's one of those games that will be very easy to get into, but very difficult to master. And so it's a game that people will, of course, min-max it, which I don't like the min-maxing in games. I don't do it myself. I try not to do it. I try to just play games to get enjoyment out of it, and I try to present games that way as well. And Master of Magic, I'm blown away by just how accessible I think this game will be for players who enjoy that fantasy genre and just want a game that's fun to play. It's can be very difficult, but really just depends on how you play it, whether it's going to be difficult or not, like the settings and so on and so forth. But as far as just a nice game, I know that, for example, I spoke about Age of Wonders 3, which is what I've been playing while the embargo for Master of Magic is on. People come in when I'm streaming that and actually really struggle with Age of Wonders 3 because of the complexity of the tactical battles. They don't know to play super defensively, and so it's sort of you've got to learn Age of Wonders 3 to get the feel of how each unit has to like. If you make one wrong, if you move one hex further than what you should be moving in Age of Wonders 3, you can destroy your battle. Like, you can actually have to save scum and replay your battle. But in Master of Magic, it's much simpler.
Okay, that's interesting that you said this, because I have played Master of Magic as well, and I wasn't really blown away with it. I think it's a good game, but I basically, when I was playing it, I wasn't overwhelmed with it. And I've also recently been playing the remastered version of Rome Total War. And I remember playing that one and thinking kind of the same thing I was thinking when I was playing Master of Magic, that, this was a really good game, and I had like these rose-tinted glasses about playing this again. But if I was to just come and play this game as it is right now, never having all these wonderful memories of the original Master Magic or Rome Total War, and I didn't play the original Master Magic very much at all, so I don't have the same kind of rose-tinted glasses. Maybe that's what I was missing. Anyways, I didn't find that the game blew me away. I found it like a reasonably good 4X fantasy game, but I also remember thinking, I feel like Age of Wonders is better than this and was released 10 years ago. Do you have any, does that jive with you at all? You think that maybe it's just two different players, and a person who does like Age of Wonders might not like as much Master of Magic by comparison? And maybe Master Magic is more for like entry level? Yeah,
it is entry level. Master Magic is definitely going to be, and I'm not saying that it's like a dumbed down game. It's actually got a lot of complexity, a lot of, as I said, a lot of immersion. It really does feel good, and each faction plays incredibly differently. But then so they do in Age of Wonders as well. By the way, Age of Wonders was based on Master of Magic originally, so there's sort of like a bit of a connection there anyway. But I think Age of Wonders, the reason I love Age of Wonders is the tactical battles and the complexity of the tactical battles. And I guess the three of us are in that sort of category where we appreciate that, probably more so than casual gamers. I mean, we're lucky in as much we can sort of, we get to play these incredibly complex games and really can sort of delve into it. Whereas there's a lot of gamers out there who don't have the time or the inclination to sort of study a game and sort of try to sort of really get into the meat of it. And I find that whenever I stream Age of Wonders, there's a group of people who come in who absolutely love it. And there's a group of people who come in and say, look, I've got it. I've played it for about 10 minutes. I love watching it. I love watching them play it. I just don't like playing it myself. Whereas I think Master of Magic people will enjoy playing it. And I enjoy it as well. Like, not as much as Age of Wonders 3, but it's still like, and as you say, probably 6 years. I don't think it's 10 years, Age of Wonders 3. I think it's don't think it's that old, but it's but yeah, Master of Magic is for me it's my third favorite game of the year. I've put so many hours into it this just in the last few months actually, and I wouldn't do that unless I really enjoyed playing it, and I have thoroughly enjoyed playing it. I'm just trying to see where it actually is on my list of games. I'm sort of thinking it would actually be up there pretty high actually, but I'm not seeing it there. I sort of assumed that with the amount I've been playing it, I'm just looking through my Steam list at the moment. Like I've got, for example, Fallen Enchantress. I played about 260 hours of that one. Age of Wonders 3, I've played 1,400 hours. But I can't see Master of Magic there yet. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so I've played nearly 60 hours of Master of Magic, and that's under embargoes and with press versions of the game, and that's a lot of time to be playing a game that's not actually released yet. And so for me, I'm thoroughly enjoying playing that one.
Okay, good. Well, let's jump over. Wow, Tiashi, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is Strategic Command American Civil War.
Wow, we have different thoughts on this game.
Really? Okay. Well, so it's 3 because there are flaws, but there are elements of the game that I think it does a very good job of and that I think are unique and why I wanted to put it on this list and call it out. And basically it's, the Strategic Command formula. It's a turn-based war game that turns last 2 weeks, and it looks at the American Civil War. In the past, they've done World War I, they've done World War II, they've done games with like big sprawling fronts, not so much games of the age of rifles and muskets when you had kind of rapid maneuvering tactical armies. And so I think that's part of where the game struggles.
Yeah.
Is that it creates sort of this front line across, the US in the Civil War, which just is pretty ahistorical outside of maybe like the Siege of Petersburg in 64, 65. So it does kind of create this like front line where, Virginia turns into a whole bunch of corps stretched across Virginia to West Virginia. You never have like a World War I type situation where you've got like nonstop units across the entire US, the eastern half of the US. And that's because they make the map a lot bigger to try and minimize that. And they obviously sort of had it in their mind that they wanted to prevent sort of a purely World War I-esque sort of war of attrition where you're just sort of grinding corps against corps and there's no real sense of like, again, the genius of those tactical battles in the Civil War. And so like that's where the game I think struggles the most, is that you just never get the full sense of maneuver or rapid and decisive engagements that then peter out and armies just sort of sit and stare at each other. What I do think the game does very, very well, that very few games that cover this conflict do, though, is it gives a sense of importance to the naval side of things. And so it really encourages using your naval assets to lock down enemy ports, using your naval assets to support dropping troops on different forts that close down ports. I think this game, better than any game I can think of, does a good job of really lending itself to that, Scott's Great Snake, the Anaconda plan, where you will slowly, if you're playing as the North, strangle the Confederacy by closing port after port after port along the East Coast or along the Gulf Coast. Not always by taking the cities. Sometimes you have to take the forts that guard the city's entrances. Sometimes you have to take an island off the port. I think in like Savannah's case, if you destroy the fort off the actual city, there's no way the enemy can get at you because it's an island. But if you take that fort, you close the port because there's no way for shipping to get in and out of the harbor when there's a hostile fort right there. And so I really think it does a good job of basically managing the naval and everything except for the rapid maneuvers of sort of the Eastern Front or the Western Front. And some of those naval aspects also carry over to river operations where you can run shipping past forts on the Mississippi River. You can do that and drop troops behind the forts and sort of wage sort of like a Vicksburg-like campaign the way Grant did. And so, it's I think there's a lot that's done well there. It is not a perfect game. That's why it's number 3 on this list. But I remember when I was playing, I was like, this hits right in a way that other games generally don't on this topic. And so while there are flaws, there are limitations, I do appreciate what they tried to do. And I would love to see more games take a look at what they did from a naval and strategic perspective and see if there's anything that, maybe they can marry that with other ideas of how to handle, the land campaigns in the East.
I've got to say, I was actually really surprised. I saw the launch stream of the game, and I was surprised at just how fluid the actual. I always assumed that the American Civil War was very static, like what we sort of see with typical war games, where you are sort of moving tiles around, where there's not a real lot of fluidity to the movement, and you don't have a lot of scope. But it looks like that game actually had an awful lot of scope for that sort of style of, as you say, sort of being able to use river systems with boats to sort of be able to sort of move your way around. I was really impressed with it. I did try playing it after watching the launch stream, thinking, "Oh wow, this looks like a really, really interesting game." I just couldn't get into it. I didn't understand it. It was fun to watch for me, but I just couldn't. It was. I guess I didn't want to invest the time in trying to learn all the intricacies of actually playing the game.
Had you played any of the other Strategic Command titles, Das?
I have got, I'm just looking through my list now. I've got Strategic Command World War II, World at War. I've got Strategic Command World War One. I've got it like on my shelf. I've got like old CDs and things. And I know that I've got Strategic Command games from back in there. I never loved any of them. Like it was just one of those things where I'd get it, I would play it, and but then it was just one of those things where I think, there's better war games, but when I saw the American Civil War version and saw actually what you could do with that, it seemed so different to the other ones, because the other ones were very, very static. We had like a very much a static line that you were trying to sort of manage, whereas the American Civil War, it did seem like there was almost like guerrilla warfare aspects that, from what I could sort of see with the launch, that I thought, well, that's a really interesting take on the American Civil War.
Yeah, and there definitely can be in certain parts of the map where there can be some guerrilla warfare, or you need to like make sure to garrison certain spots in the map, and that's pretty accurate to like what was happening in Missouri, for example, or in some cases some spots in Virginia. It's an interesting conflict. I think, if you look at the conflict specifically along the rivers, it is very unique, very, sort of in some senses, Grant's Vicksburg campaign is very Napoleonic in the way that he uses the rivers to rapidly flank and outmaneuver and force his enemy into a siege that results in their destruction. I mean, there's some of the most decisive, impressive campaigns, I would argue, in American military history, as opposed to sort of, I think America tends to not be the most, we just kind of feel boring sometimes with some of our military tactics, less decisive. And I think there's some exceptions to that in the Civil War. But that's probably something that'll piss a lot of people off if I share my thoughts on that. So
yeah, well, don't mention it then. Don't mention it.
Oops. I think that the reason that you already mentioned this, but I just want to highlight this, the game really didn't click at all for me. I felt, first of all, I think that Strategic Command World War One I can't actually think of a better World War One game right now. I mean, the naval side of that one was not good at all, but the base, like land combat, the diplomacy, all that stuff, I think that they did an excellent job. And maybe it's because they also didn't have that many competitors in the Grand Strategy World War One department, but I think it was better than the previous, what's their names?
AJOD?
Yeah, AJOD. Yeah, it was better than the AJOD attempt. It was better than Commander of the Great War. Anyway, and even Supreme Ruler, all those. It was very good, though. It was not just better than those. It was a very good game. I think the front and the grinding, the attrition, it worked really well in that game. Now take those same mechanics and apply it to the Civil War, as you were already mentioning, THG, and it just doesn't work. I mean, the fact that a stack is usually going to be a strength 10, and one strength 10 fights another strength 10. I mean, I think that the numbers game, you kind of need to see the age odd, like this is a stack of 64,000 people. This is a stack of 40,000 people. You actually need to see that. I think that that's actually really missing from the game, having these strength 0 to 10 things that are just staggered out hexes next to each other. It just makes it feel like you modded the World War I game to be in the Civil War environment. And I completely lost any like touch with reality of the Civil War. I mean, I felt like I was playing a mod for World War One, and I didn't actually explore the naval side of things that you mentioned. So that might have been done really well, and I never got to it.
Yeah, it's less like that. I think that in the early war, but I do agree as the war goes on and as you get more units and the map fills up, it does become like that. But I think the thing is the Civil War so rarely gets adequate naval treatment, and it is very fundamentally a game about, or a war that came down to logistics and down to naval strategy and grand strategy. The naval campaigns along the Mississippi and along the East Coast and along the Gulf Coast were so vital in ensuring the ultimate victory. And all we really focused, or all we tend to focus on in our games is like, ooh, the big flashy Eastern theater battles. But at the end of the day, those naval components are very vital to the outcome of the war. And I think it's the first game that felt like they did it right strategically.
It's certainly the first time I've seen that in a game. I'm not American. I don't know much about American history. I guess I'm more Eurocentric when I sort of look at that sort of era. But I was surprised actually at that, as you say, at the river boats, the things like that. I just had no idea that the Civil War had those aspects to it. And so I actually learnt a lot just by watching that one stream. It was sort of one of those things I thought, wow, this is actually a whole lot. And from what you're saying now, THG with the aspects about that, it does. Like as an education piece, I would think that this sort of game would actually enlighten people, I guess, to a large degree. It's certainly I was enlightened by looking at the game. It's just a sort of how those sort of aspects did work. As I say, I had no idea. I knew about the Monitor and those sorts of ships, like where they were starting to sort of bring in the Age of Steel, I guess, with the ships and the steamboats and things. But that was all I knew. I didn't realize that there was actually a whole river system that was where the war had this sort of guerrilla aspect to it that was really quite interesting. I found that much more interesting than the actual big battles in the game.
Tortuga, what about your number 3?
I was going to say, well, Tortuga, what do you... All right, so for my number 3, I am going to pull out a game I don't even know if you guys have heard of, much less played. My number 3 is going to go to Diplomacy Is Not an Option.
Oh, awesome game.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, I hope it was released this year, by the way. I mean, it's in early access.
I don't think it was. That was last year, wasn't it?
Was it? Okay, I need to quickly check my facts.
Maybe it was. No, maybe you might be right. I'll have a look.
Diplomacy Is Not... I thought I looked this up beforehand. It was released, please, February 9th, 2022. Whew. All right, good. So I thought I checked this too because it was close. Anyways, this game is great. It's basically Stronghold meets They Are Billions. It's that kind of game. It just does everything right to me. I love it. In fact, the only thing that I can tell you I don't like about the game is that they haven't continued the campaign. It's just this very, very, very placeholder campaign thing, so that almost the only thing you can do in the game is play on the randomly generated maps. And one of the things I really liked about They Are Billions is going through the full campaign. They have this whole level up system where you can like acquire points that you put into technology. It's basically like a research tree as you progress through the campaign maps. So if they end up doing something like that, Diplomacy Is Not an Option will become like probably one of the top titles for the decade. I mean, it's really good. It's the feel of the units control is really good. And that was also true with They Are Billions. I think that both those games have really mastered that very, I don't know how to say, fluid control of an RTS game. So anyways, I love defensive building games like those, and this one is my number 3. I don't have much more to say about it other than I can easily recommend it to anybody who likes these kind of games.
I think you're dead right there. It's a game that I forgot about it, to be honest, that it was in this year. Not that it would get into my top 3, but like it is an exceptional game. And it's sort of funny, I'm just looking at the updated roadmap. I can't see anything about that there being any. I think people do like these sort of random the endless mode is going to get some love. I mean, it's still in early access, the game, so I'm not sure how long it will stay in early access, but there is actually supposed to be another update coming out in December. So at the end of November, they sort of put the what their plans actually are. But I'm just skimming through. I can't see anything about there being. Actually, here we go. After the update coming, the team will be focused on the single player campaign. There we are. So
okay, finally, my cries have been heard. I know one of the developers commented on one of my YouTube videos on this. Who knows how long they watched? They might have just watched the first 2 minutes of it and whatever. But this is something I constantly mention is, boy, I wish that single player campaign wasn't just 2 missions. Obviously, it's something very good about a game if you're saying, I wish there was more of it. And that's really my only complaint, is that I want more of it.
No, excellent game. It's did you play that one, THG?
I did not, although I feel like I have, because Tortuga has mentioned it like 3 or 4 times this year on different episodes.
Yeah, I've been playing it throughout the year.
I haven't played it since release, but there's been a lot of updates. So it's a game again that I've just kept on meaning to come back to, and I haven't. It was super impressive. There's been so many games like this for this year where there's where you play them and you think, oh, this is awesome, and then then there's the next one comes along.
Well, Das, why don't you continue down the line? What's your number 2?
My number 2 I've only played for 2 days, and again I'm playing under an embargo at the time of recording. But by the time you guys publish this, it will be released, and that game is, of course, a staple of my channel for so long, the free version of the game. But this will be the Steam version, or the premium version of Dwarf Fortress. I'm so blown away by what I've seen so far in the game. I hope it launches into early access. And I know that Tortuga, we often have disagreements about whether games should go into early access or not. I hope it does go into early access, because there's still a lot of polish that needs to be put into it. But God, it is so approachable now. And I think that players who, again, similar to Master of Magic versus Age of Wonders 3, like where that complexity sort of is a barrier to entry for Age of Wonders, but should be opened a little bit for Master of Magic. I think a lot of players actually start to try to play Dwarf Fortress because it's spawned so many games over the years, like, RimWorld. There's just such a big, long list of games that have been heavily inspired by what Dwarf Fortress does. And now we've got a version of the game where the user experience and the user interface doesn't get in your way. And so it really will be, I think, the game that people who are interested in Dwarf Fortress will embrace it and actually not have to struggle with it. And that for me is absolutely massive. And just playing it over the last few days, the tooltips are incredibly good. The tutorial is not good, and that will probably be changed. It may even be changed by the time the game is launched. I've done 4 series videos, which will be out by the time this series is out, and on the tutorial and basically how to do what the tutorial doesn't tell you. And so just going through for new players as to how to get into the game itself, because the tutorial doesn't do a good job of that, but it does an okay job. It's sort of like a 50-50 for me, the tutorial. But the actual game itself, the immersion that he's now sort of got with the graphics is great. But the big thing for me is the way that the interface has now been restructured, like the user experience in Dwarf Fortress now makes sense. Like, it's much, much more intuitive. There's still, and it's still based on, it hasn't been dumbed down at all, but what they've done is they've simplified aspects of the game. For example, if one of the things that people used to struggle with, and I made a video probably 10 years ago now on how to manage stairs in Dwarf Fortress. And I had to speak about it for 20 minutes to just explain how stairs work in the game. And it's one of my most popular videos. Still, even today, people still actually watch it and comment on it because it explains how stairs work in Dwarf Fortress. It's that sort of complexity, because you had to start with a downstair, then you had to build up downstairs, and then you had to build an upstair at the bottom to be able to then sort of work your fortress. And if you got any of those things wrong, you could create blocks where you couldn't get through, or all sorts of different things would go crazy. Whereas the game, just that one aspect, and there's so many other aspects in the game that does this, but when you start and finish a staircase, it automatically puts the start and end in, which seems really simple when you say it. But God, that was that was so difficult for people to actually get conceptually what was going on. And it's just little things like that where they've just thought, okay, that's not something that if you're playing the game, you don't need to know to go and specify a very particular style of digging a hole in the ground. And so they've done that all the way through. And so I'm really impressed. Like, it's not just a graphical version of the game. It's actually a are very much open. It's opened it right up with the tool tips, as I say, the user experience. It's just, I think it's just going to be an absolute incredible game. But I do hope it launches into early access until they really get it polished, and then they move it into, or actually maybe even just keep it in early access. Though, I mean, let's face it, the Dwarf Fortress, the classic version, the free version, has been in basically been in beta since it started 20 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. There can't be any concern about this guy like suddenly ditching the project, right? This is practically his child, so I don't. Whether it's early access or not, I think that people can feel comfortable that this will continue to be developed. I mean, I say that, but is there any hint that he might actually be ready to move on from it?
No. This is he loves it. Like from what I can gather, it's one of these things where he's even just like talking with the development team at KitFox and things like that. They've it's interesting because there's a calmness about when you're sort of dealing with them and when they're dealing with him as well. Like there's actually, like this is Tarn Adams, the actual developer of Dwarf Fortress, get a sense of not rushing and just doing what you need to do and just getting the job done and focusing on what needs to be focused on, but without a panic. And I think it's refreshing to come across that in any sort of development field, but in gaming in particular, quite often you get a sense that there's a lot of activity in different gaming studios where there's a lot of stress and a lot of panic. And I don't sense that at all from the development of this one. And I like that because it means that they're in it for the long haul. It's a marathon, and they've been in the marathon for 20 years now. They'll just continue on. And I'm really, as I say, super impressed with the game, super impressed with the development that I can sort of see with the game as well. It's, as I say, I'm really blown away by it. So that's my second best game of the year. I've been looking forward to it for a long, long time. I didn't think it would come this year, to be honest. I thought that based on the way that the development of the base game has sort of been, or the classic game has gone over the years, there's no rush and there's just a focus on what needs to be focused on. I was very surprised when they actually came out with the release in December of 2022. Like it was very, very pleasantly surprised. And the game, as I say, it's incredible. I haven't had any crashes at all with it so far. It's so they're working on stability a lot, from what I can sort of gather. That, they're trying to find ways to crash the game, but I certainly haven't been able to find anything. And I've been modding it and sort of changing the graphics and changing the fonts and stuff like that, just to suit my own style. Putting in my own style of world creation. So it's still got a lot of that sort of interactivity that you can actually put into it as well. So you can go as shallow or as deep into the game now as you like. Whereas previously it was so difficult to get into. Whereas now it's just going to be loaded in. It's pretty quick on the Steam version is much faster than the classic version to actually play, and it's really, really cool. So I think that this will be an insta classic. I mean, it's already a classic game, but the Steam version will take over from the free version, I'm sure, in the hearts and minds of people that love these sorts of games.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hype building on my Discord server, so I've seen that there's a huge amount of interest in this game, which is kind of funny to think because with all the peripherals, I guess I call them, all the mods and stuff like Dwarf Therapists that have come along for the original Dwarf Fortress, you think that people already have enough to be like somewhat satisfied with, but no, man, the hype is definitely there about this. So actually hearing this from you makes me more excited to be involved in it. I never really got that involved in the original Dwarf Fortress, believe it or not. I mean, it's a game that I should, in theory, ticks all the boxes for me. But I don't know. I think that RimWorld came along early enough. When I discovered Dwarf Fortress, RimWorld was already a thing. And it was just so much easier to get into that I shifted that way.
Yeah, look, and RimWorld's one of those exceptional games. I mean, in reality, you could even call the DLC that they've just brought out for RimWorld one of the best games of the year as well. With the changes that brought to RimWorld. I'd look, rather than going off on the RimWorld tangent, but the Dwarf Fortress is a very, very special game. It's spawned so many other games as well that have been inspired by it. In fact, the closest game I find to Dwarf Fortress is actually Shadow Empire in terms of the world creation and the planet creation. It's the depth in both of those games. There's nothing that comes close to these two actual games, in my opinion. Yeah, I'm sort of one of those games that I think that knowing the sort of games that you do play, it doesn't have any navies in it, but
I don't know where this stigma came. It's funny because before Rule the Waves, my channel was Advanced Tactics Gold, basically. I mean, and other war games. At some point, it's funny. I don't know which came first. The association. I don't know. It's an image. It's something which is built upon itself. I actually don't even have any special preference or knowledge about naval stuff. But okay, I don't know how this happened. Okay, well let's move on to TSG. What's your number 2?
I would have to say my number 2 for the year is probably Victoria 3.
Okay, well let's merge because that is also my number 2 game of the year.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so I mean, I think, and we talked about this in a previous episode, so I don't need to talk about Victoria for forever. But I think Victoria 3, what really works for me is the way that the markets and the economies work. Building your industry up and sort of expanding supply chains and getting access to new markets and new materials and resources, that is very satisfying. I love watching, as you kind of keep building a plant up or whatnot, you get those economies of scale, you begin building more advanced goods. I think that's really enjoyable to kind of watch your nation move from agrarian to an industrial nation, to sort of slowly see your construction and other influence and power expand is very well done. And, I think those are the strengths of the game for me. I think the military aspect still could use some work. We'll see how they patch things. But the frontline system is because you don't have any control in terms of how the fronts are generated, it leads to some weird front lines. If like different nations interrupt the front, you get like, oh, you've got a small little front here on the Indian territory that's in the middle of this huge front from east to west across the entire territory of the US and Mexico. Like the fronts are just a little bit odd. And I think they really need to commit to a particular direction on how involved they want the player to be in terms of military. But overall, I find the game really interesting and enjoyable. And I think even the diplomacy is pretty well done compared to a lot of strategy games of this scope. And I really enjoy it. And I'm excited to see where this game goes. I think I was a little concerned when I saw some of the negative reviews and some of the way that people responded to it, that it was going to go the Imperator route. But I think if you compare the actual like player count in Victoria 3, now like a month plus past release, even though it's been a bit mixed in terms of the reviews, at least overall, I think it's at 66% right now. The recent reviews over the last 5,400 are over 70%, like 72%. And it still has, we're recording this at like 1 a.m, going into a new week. And there's still over like 7,000 people playing right now. The peaks and valleys of the player count seem to be much stronger than where Imperator was at this time. So I'm pretty confident.
I never would have thought this. I never got the impression this was ever like Imperator Rome. From the very get-go, I felt this game was solid. It had a much better basis. When I played Imperator Rome, that was not my first impression with that game. Yeah, this is my number 2 because partly it's great. It's a great game already, but partly it's a great frame of a game that I know that Paradox, in their usual way, will continue to fill in over the next few months and maybe even years. But it's a game that I know I'm going to be playing for a long time. And that's actually something, it's really something. I think the three of us, especially as people get older and their free time for playing games gets less and less, this is a game which I know I will be seeking multiplayer games in this for years to come. It's one of those games that I would love to be like, hey, TSG, let's just go play a game. This weekend, let's play a game of Vicky 3. And I haven't had that experience very often in a lot of the games. In fact, a lot of the games that we're talking about here, they don't have multiplayer, or they don't have multiplayer that you could do in like a single evening or on over the course of a couple of evenings. And Paradox has gotten that piece of the puzzle just right. So the game does have some issues right now, some of the ones that you mentioned. I really enjoy the way conflicts build, the process where you're maneuvering with different nations and trying to bring people onto different sides. That's a very refreshing look at how the conflicts start and really how things somehow, right now too often, much too often, but how things build in from like a single treaty port between me as Sweden and me trying to request a treaty port in Denmark boil up into, oh, well, Russia's going to join Denmark. Well, let me see if I can get England and French on my side. And boom, you have World War I, I don't know. It's very organic the way that diplomacy works. And okay, that's just one example. I really like the game, and I'm partly because of how I like it right now, and also because I know I'll be playing it for a while to come.
Yeah, and I'm a little torn on that because I feel like the way that what you're describing is a great example of why the sandbox approach works for this game and sort of Paradox games in general. That being said, I do wish there was more flavor and content that made me feel like I was existing in 1850s Prussia or 1870s America. Like the American Civil War, I don't think it's fixed yet. It's broke.
I'm not even playing the US yet, unfortunately, because that's the nation I most want to play as.
Yeah. But and then like the unification of Prussia, like they have this journal system that kind of tries to direct you down some historical feeling paths. But I do think they may have leaned a little too heavily into sandbox. I think in the Victorian era, I'm a little more interested in like getting some of the history in a way that maybe doesn't matter as much to me in a game like CK, where it's like it's all about the families and it's over such a long period of time that the history is a little bit less important, right? You're going to crusade or whatever, but like other than that, do I care if these events happen historically the way they did in CK? Probably less so in that. I think in Victoria, it would be nice to have a little more historical flavor, a little bit less sandbox, or at least as an option. And so I hope they build out the journal system in a little bit more depth for each country to add a little bit more of that if you want to play that way.
I think that's the thing that I guess inspires people to play Victoria. Like, and I'm thinking way back to Victoria 1 and then Victoria 2. It's a game that people are quite passionate about playing, and it's I think from what I can remember, and you guys may actually have a better recollection of the actual history of the development of Victoria 2. Victoria 1 came out and people enjoyed playing it, but it wasn't a very popular game. Like it wasn't one of their world beaters in compared to the original Crusader Kings or anything like that. And so when they were looking at the next versions to bring in, they were looking at Crusader Kings 2, which I think they might have brought that in before Victoria 2. But Victoria 2, they weren't going to develop. And so they basically, and I think that was announced, and then there was such an outcry from people who loved that era, loved what happened with Victoria. It wasn't a very strong, it wasn't a big community, but it was loud enough that I think they did some more research and then found that they were surprised at just how immersive or how supportive people were of the concept of that era, like the Age of Rifles sort of era. And it was one of those things where they eventually then made Victoria 2, which was a smash hit, and I think that then sort of brought a lot of people into the realm of that era, which I think is then feeding the popularity of Victoria 3, which I find really fascinating because it's sort of it's a part of history that often gets overlooked, and it's part of history that, look, to be honest, I don't know much about it, but I certainly enjoy reading about it and watching TV shows about that part of history. In fact, it's sort of also like in the game that we're not probably going to be talking about, but what's it called? It begins with F. Fire and Maneuver. I don't know if you guys have played that at all, and what your thoughts. I've only played it when it just released, but that's another game that I want to come back to and play again. Have you guys played that one at all?
I played the demo when it was like I think still under development or whatnot. That's made by the YouTuber or whatnot, right?
Yeah, Armchair Historian. So he's actually sort of made it. It's sort of funny. I'm just on their page now. Actually, this is incredible. It's the reviews are very positive. Now, when I played it, it wasn't polished enough, and I know that we're sort of delving away from Victoria, and this is purely a tactical battles system. But actually, the fact that it's now rated very positive is. God, that's actually going to be worth having another look at, I think. But that's I was impressed with the scope of that one. Like you mentioned about the tactical battles in Victoria. I haven't played much of Victoria, to be honest, hardly anything at all. But it is, as I say, it's a game that I want to go and play that one. But actually, looking at this recent the recent information that's now come back from Fire and Maneuver, I think I might play that as well.
I didn't really play a lot of Fire Maneuver. I played a little bit of the demo. I thought it had a positive review from like day one, but it seemed like most of the folks I usually look at for games were kind of like, it's got some warts that really hinder it.
It did at the start.
But I also wonder, like, and this isn't meant as like a shot at Armchair Historian or anything, but I wonder when you have that large of a following, because he's a very large YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And you make a game, like, do you just have a built-in sense of like positive reviews from folks who are following your channel who might not normally buy war games but are going to buy your game.
Yeah, that's a point. I hadn't thought of that.
Also, it was free too, right? Like it was a free download and then you had to pay for like different campaigns. I think that goes a long way toward getting positive reviews when you structure it kind of almost in that, like, again, like kind of like a mobile type business model.
Yeah, I don't like that business model myself. That's something that I get suspicious of games that do actually have that sort of free aspect. But again, I enjoyed the vision of that game, but not the actual execution at the time of launch. But I noticed that there's been some pretty big updates over the last few months, and probably is worth going back and having another look at that game, I think.
Yeah, I think the aesthetics are really good, and I would also say that I think that's one thing his YouTube channel does very well is like the aesthetics. And so I think it meshes with what he does on his videos.
Yeah. So anyway, that's off the tangent from Victoria, but Victoria, like as you say, we've been talking about that one, but I haven't played much of that myself. But it's a game that again, I love that era of history without knowing much about it. To be honest, it's sort of I've read all the Flashman books a number of times. I've enjoyed those. I don't know if you guys have read those, but they cover the Victorian.
I have not, but. We've covered our number twos, I guess. Tortuga, we both knocked ours out at the same time, so I guess that gets us into the final realm, into the number ones. What do you got, Das?
For me, it's like all year. I've thoroughly enjoyed playing Distant Worlds 2. And I know that there'll be people who are saying, oh, look, it was broken at launch and so on and so forth. I've just found it to be the most fun gaming experience I've had all year. And it's just gotten better and better and better over the years. I know that it's a very, very small development team. Essentially, there's two main developers. They've brought a third developer in to sort of work on the game, plus some artists as well. So it's a very, very small team. They're very stringent in what they do. And I've got to say, look, I've been involved in the beta process of the game as well. And it's the best beta process I've ever been involved in, which I know that when the game launched, people were saying, didn't this even go through beta? But it did, and it went through a very, very good beta. But it's just that some people had troubles, getting the game to run, and they've been working on those issues, getting things sort of fixed. But they're also now, in recent months, been bringing in a lot of quality of life changes to the game. I know it's a complex game, and it's a bit like Age of Wonders in that sort of sense, where some people will embrace it and other people will just find it a bit too complex. I love it. For me, it's just such an immersive game. It's I love the fact that you've actually got now the turrets have actually got like fields of fire, like where you've got sort of like you've got sort of angles that you've got to consider, and each faction actually has different ways of actually then having their ships sort of being able to fire on the enemy. For example, you've got the Teekans, who their main firepower is firing backwards. Whereas, the bugs or the Boscarans, they're full on aggression. And so nearly all of their turrets face forward. And I find that just that one little aspect means that when you design the ships for those two different factions, you've really got to think about different ways of actually playing.
Okay, so spoiler alert, this is not my number one game, so it didn't make my top three. Now, that's kind of a little bit of finessing. I think it is a good game. I wanted to make sure that we didn't talk about it until Das mentioned it for his number one. But I do think that I love Distant Worlds, the original, and I didn't play it right when it came out. I played it, I don't know when I started playing it, but probably around the time Universe came out. So it was already a pretty polished game by then. However, Distant Worlds Universe was something which just completely engrossed me. It was one of my favorite games for many years. And I feel like, unfortunately, that I took so many steps back because of the Distant Worlds 2 experience where, you're back into like a raw game, and it just punctured this pristine, perfect image I had of Distant Worlds that I was kind of reeling from there's just when you're in the beta process, which I was, it's a cautionary note to anybody who gets involved in these that you end up seeing a lot of, it's like watching the sausage getting made. And that can really turn you off to the whole thing. I mean, especially if you have a finite amount of time and you're not sure when to jump into a game. I can see how a lot of people benefit from not jumping in until the game is in a state where you're going to enjoy it right away.
I agree with you 100%. I think particularly as YouTubers, and as streamers, we have to protect that aspect of how we look at games, because at the end of the day, if we get too involved in the early stages of a beta, where, as you say, you are watching the raw materials going into the sausage, and then get turned off eating the sausage. That's not good for anybody. I know I don't like to jump into betas early. I like it to be a little bit more polished before I sort of start to get into them.
I think it goes another way too. Is I get criticism on some of my first look videos where people are like, "Oh, you don't know the game" or whatever, and it's kind of like, well, that's the point, right? Like sometimes the intent is to show you what it looks like if you're just going to pick up and play a game, and if you're involved in a beta or like deeply involved in a game in the weeks and months up to launch, there's some value in understanding the game. But if you become an expert in a game, it can really shape how you present that game, and it may not reflect what like the ordinary person who's going to pick it up and play experiences either, because you're 1,000 hours into a game, right? By the time it comes out.
Yeah, but I think that if you're mindful of that, and I know that that's certainly something I always try to sort of recenter myself with any games that I'm sort of going to be presenting that I have spent a lot of time with. I always sort of think, how is a new person going to struggle with this game? And it's the first thing I always ask myself is like, what's the thing that's going to stop them from enjoying the game? And I try to focus on that as much as I possibly can. And quite often I find that when you do have a pretty thorough knowledge of a game, you can actually sort of explain the things they won't look for. And in all the games that we've discussed today, from when you were talking about the strategic command game all the way through that, when you know what to look for, and you only really find that by becoming fairly proficient at a game, you can then communicate that and I guess get people inspired by the vision that you've actually been able to pass on. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I find that I think that's my mission with every video I make is how can I give the person watching this who hasn't really used to the game a vision of what they could do in the game to make them inspired to play it. And not that I'm trying to coerce them to play it, but I'm just trying to sort of, for people who are interested. And I found that with the original Distant Worlds, it was a game that when people were thinking that they had to, again, min-max everything. I hate the games that you need to sort of min-max things to sort of get a result. But the Distant Worlds universe was so much about establishing small objectives and the immersion of that. And Distant Worlds 2 is the same, so for me it's actually the actual approach and where you sort of do get that immersion and where it's so exciting is the fact that you are playing these little mini campaigns all the way through.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair. I think I'm a little jaded my day job, where I see a lot of product managers who get too close to their products, and it kind of blindsides them to the consumer experience sometimes.
I know what you mean. You're falling in love with what they've done and stuff like that. That's a danger.
It's not even necessarily falling in love with it so much as it is just you're so familiar with it, it can cause you to not see what the customer is going to see, right?
Yeah, but then again, I think that's I sort of think that's actually sort of what we do is like with what we do is it's our job to not do that. So I don't think we'd be we wouldn't have a following if we weren't able to actually sort of impart those sorts of visions to people or explain what they can look at differently. I think if we couldn't do that, we wouldn't do what we do.
I'm just going to say I'm going to revisit Distant Worlds 2 in 2023. I haven't checked it out for like the last 3 months or whatever. So I think it's probably gotten a lot better. And yeah, it's probably time for me to take another look at it. All right, Matt, what's your number one game?
Well, I won't say Starship Troopers. I know you want me to. I feel like I'm cheating here a little bit. I don't have one.
Okay, well that would make your number two the number one. I mean
that's kind of what I was trying to hint at earlier, is that so that's what I was trying to hint at earlier, is I feel like this was a year with a lot of games that I would say were good games. I don't know that there was one game that stood out to me as like, this is a great game. This is the number one game. Like, I think Victoria 3 came the closest to it, but I think until some of those things that we talked about on that episode and a little bit earlier, until they get ironed out, like, I don't know that there was a great game this year that I feel like this is the number one game of the year. And it's a little bit of a cop-out, but to me, this felt like a very busy year.
Hey, hang on. I've got to cut in here. You can't do this. This is a season 8 of Game of Thrones. You can't do it to
it. Wait, what's that from? Oh yeah, here's something coming. Boo. Boo.
And I'm not doing this to like, oh, let's do something spicy on the episode. I was sitting down. I was like, what is the number one game of the year? And it's like, well, it just felt like a year where a lot of games came out And I think Starship Troopers is a good example of this, Tortuga. A lot of games came out where it's like, oh, this is interesting. Like, this is a fun game. I'm spending a little bit of time in it. And then, meh, moving on.
Okay, so your point is you specifically don't want to name a number one because you want to emphasize the level playing field and that nothing was not, I wouldn't say like mediocre, but nothing was outstanding.
There were a lot of good releases this year. I don't know that there was a great game this year, to me.
Okay, because mathematically, I'm just going to point out the obvious here. If you had a number 2 and a number 3, and you don't have a number 1, that really just makes the number 2 and number 3 the 1 and number 2.
I guess, but like, so I would put some of these games like Dune Spice Wars. It was an interesting strategy game that came out. I'm not like even really big into the Dune series, but like that was an interesting game that they spent some time in. I thought they did some interesting things, and it was a lot of fun. I would say Starship Troopers, another game that I think it lacked a little bit in terms of depth, but like it was a fun RTS game to jump into and get a little bit of flavor of the Starship Troopers universe if you were interested in that. I thought Attack at Dawn was a really interesting World War II game that looks at the desert theater, and I thought the aesthetics behind that game were outstanding. But I'm not sure it did anything that made me say like, ooh, like this is going to be something I'll come back to in 3 or 4 years and keep playing. I just felt like this was a very busy year of a lot of really quality games, but nothing that stood out to me as like, this is going to be the game of the future. And I kind of was a little, maybe it was because of the status of the game at release, but it kind of felt like there were a lot of games that came out like Distant Worlds, maybe a little bit less so Victoria, where there were games that came out that people were really excited about, but then they just kind of withered. And I don't know if they'll stand the test of time or not. Like, it just felt like a lot of games came out, people were interested in it, and then everybody moved on. And there weren't those, even some of those really hotly anticipated games. I just don't know how many of them are going to have staying power this year.
Well,
is that your staying power, or do you think like a market staying power?
I don't know. Like, I guess, I was saying maybe this is me, right? Like maybe it's because of where I am in my life right now, and I don't have that desire or energy or whatever to stay committed to a game as long as maybe I have in the past. But it just kind of feels like the social zeitgeist, whatever you call it. Like, I don't feel like a lot of games came out that people are still like screaming about months after release. And I feel like that had been the case in previous years.
He's jaded.
Maybe I'm just disconnected from the strategy world. Maybe I'm just, just throw me into the sun. It's my time is over.
He's jumped the shark. This poor man. This podcast is... Well, hey, THG, ask me what my number one game is, because how do we spend an hour and 25... Well, I mean, okay, insert amount of time that has passed after editing.
1 hour and 17 minutes. Exactly.
How do we spend this much time talking about stuff and not cover my number one yet, which is Terra Invicta. Awesome game. And I cannot believe we spent this entire time not talking about anything related to it yet. Terra Invicta came out, first of all, it came out of nowhere, but really it should have been something that I had seen coming.
I like how you talked for me, by the way.
Yeah, well, I was too excited. Yeah, it's from the makers of the Long War for XCOM, and we were talking about RNG stuff. This is obviously where I was going to tie back into that. It's basically an amazing mix of XCOM and like the Expanse almost. I don't know what you put it.
Yeah, it's political. It's probably, like, from what I can sort of see as well, like, and I mean, I didn't cover it for the simple reason it's so difficult to actually do a series on it, and I don't know what you guys think about that, but yeah, that's a good way of sort of thinking of it. It is sort of like the Expanse, very much so, where you're building up, in different factions that are sort of, in the early stages of getting into space, but it doesn't get to that part of the game for so long, and you're sort of playing this political game for such a long period.
Maybe Terra Invicta is the game that I missed, and that's why I don't have a number one, because I haven't played it really much at all.
It takes a long time to get into. So I think the problem with Terra Invicta is also one of its strengths ultimately is that it's built for a long-term game. But the problem is that it probably hasn't matured enough yet, its early access, to have honed out the kind of tedium of the initial game start. I mean, I would put it this way. I've used this analogy before, but basically the start of Terra Invicta is like playing a game of Risk, where you're taking turns putting your pieces on the board. Unfortunately, unlike in Risk, which the game itself takes way too long, the putting your pieces on the board part, which is the controlling of nations and getting into space part of Terra Invicta, lasts about 20 hours. So if you can imagine playing, it's just nuts, right? So, I mean, you spend so much time solidifying your political power on Earth when the game is clearly built to be a catapult from Earth into space, and that's metaphorical, where you're going to fight the aliens in space, and it's about space combat. And there's not, I mean, you can still do assassinations and land wars on Earth, but that's clearly not the focus. It's not where, I mean, there's a tactical side to the space combat. There's no tactical side to any of the land combat. It's very abstracted, whereas the space combat, you're designing your spaceships, and it's super cool. And if you like the Expanse, it's doing things in a Newtonian way. Relatively. I mean, I haven't, so it's really cool the way that they've done everything. It's just, and the game is great. It came out of nowhere, and it's just so satisfying. And the funny thing is that even the initial ramp up with controlling nations and all that is pretty satisfying to a degree. It just gets tedious before you get to the next step. And I think that hopefully they're working on ways of solving that. Or maybe because they are the people who made the Long War mod, which, I've spent 100 hours in a campaign on the Long War mod. I'm probably only a third the way through. Maybe that's just what they want from people, is to spend 100 hours on a gameplay. I don't know. But it's still a very good game, and to me, it's easily the number one. I've spent so much time in it, probably partly because it takes so damn long to complete a campaign, but and I foolishly started recording, so I feel like committed to go to the very end. But yeah, very good game. And the RNG side of things, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this, Das. I feel like the RNG in this game is perfect. Okay, as good as I've seen. And by that I mean it's the way I would do RNG if I was to do RNG in a game. A series of rolls that don't have a huge impact by themselves, but accumulate into something very impactful is especially the law of large numbers, right? You roll the dice enough times. This is the way I think RNG should be done, because it allows the player the agency.
Is that a bit like Dominions? How the rolls in Dominions are...
Yes.
Are pretty much sort of around an average, but then you can get some lucky rolls.
Yeah, and there's enough. The important thing is that so the thing I don't like is it's actually prevalent, funny enough, in naval combat, because it does exist in naval combat, you can say, is that one torpedo hit sinks a ship. Whereas, otherwise you'd have this slow progression of shells, but you can get a critical hit or something. So if somebody rolls a critical, boom, your ship's gone. But I prefer the player to have agency, because that's the way real life works. Is there's a hole through your ship, and now you have agency to be like, okay, maybe I'm going to start pointing my ship away. We're starting to lose this fight. This is all abstracted in die rolls, but when you have a number of small die rolls, you give the player time in between those die rolls to tweak the situation, which is how I think people enjoy that, because it's a little bit more realistic. Because there's no such thing as a 2-month turn in real life. You're playing through it, right?
That's interesting.
Anyway, I really like the RNGs. Yeah.
With the and the other side of things, and this is I think it's a game I would love to play if I was just playing for my own enjoyment. But I find that I'm looking at looking at games with videos in mind, and that's the reason that I really just shied away from that game. And I don't know if that's something that how you feel. You mentioned that you've sort of started recording, and then you're stuck with it. Does that impact your enjoyment in the negative? The fact that you are trying to record.
Interesting. What I find is actually this weird thing where I think I would drop the game. I wouldn't even play it. Sometimes if I'm not recording it, I would just okay, I've won this, so I would leave a game early. And sometimes it's really interesting to be forced to play something to completion. Now for Terra, that's in general. Terra Invicta in general, specifically, I would say it is painful, because it's the first time where it's 20 hours to get into space. You cannot just record. I have to edit. And I hate that. I think that I don't think you do a whole lot of editing in your videos, Das, right? Where you chop out.
No, hardly ever. I do it with important videos, but with the vast majority, it's just I've got a process where I automate as much as I possibly can. In fact, the longest process for me now in my other than recording, from the editing perspective, is actually the annoying upload into YouTube nowadays, where you've got to go through every single video and you can't just automate all of that. That's my biggest barrier to creating videos at the moment. So that's the bit I hate the most.
Yeah. So for me, I don't like to edit. I like to have just basically put up my raw recording, and I cannot do that with Terra Invicta because I would be like 100 episodes in before I even got into space. So I've had to like pausing OBS, doing like 2 hours of gameplay in between. It's very disconnected. So I hate it.
I do that a lot, where I record and then pause and then play forward until something happens. That's not so bad because at least you're still playing the game and enjoying it in that process. And as long as you don't get I've got a keyboard shortcut for my pausing. And sometimes I'll be recording a video and I'll be playing for hours, with things that I think are on pause, and then I'll look up and it's I've had it the other way around.
Yeah, I've had that too. Yeah. Well, anyways, so I don't know if anybody else has anything more they want to say about Terra Invicta because we're looking at time, and I have a few other questions before we conclude 2022.
Yeah, other than look, it's one of those games that, as you say, it came out of left field. It's a game that I think I think that people who don't have to record it would absolutely love the immersion of it. Unfortunately, from my perspective, I'm looking at it mainly from recording, and so it's been a game that has scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe that was the game I missed in terms of if I had time to delve into it or the energy to delve into it. I will say that is, at least from the folks that I tend to follow or whatnot, that's the game that seemed to have the most universal acclaim, I guess, and something that people are still talking about well after it originally sort of came out. So, maybe that's the game I missed this year. I don't know.
It's not too late.
Yeah. Maybe it'll be on my list next year. Did it come out late enough this year that I can claim it for 2023?
No.
No. August, September.
Okay. Well, I mean, like I was thinking Knights of Honor 2 comes out soon, and that, I generally won't count anything that comes out in December as that year, right?
Yeah, I think Knights of Honor you get away with. I mean, that comes out basically at time of recording. We're allowed to start showing content tomorrow. So after this, I'm going to be recording a video, and I don't know enough about it yet, but again, I'm super looking forward to that game. Like it's
oh man, I was going to ask you about that. I saw that on your list, and that's one I'm like really interested in. Have you played it at all, or?
Yeah, it's very much like a combination of Crusader Kings and Field of Glory Empires, in the sense that you've sort of got like, but it's also a bit like Total War as well. Like you've got the sort of,
I was going to say Total War. It did remind me of Total War.
It's better. It's better than Total War in terms of the way you manage the strategic elements in the game, but then it does actually have some. It does have Total War like combat, and you don't have to play the Total War like combat. Like it'll sort of do its own thing as well.
Awesome.
But it's I think at its heart, it is more like a paradox sort of style game with the economies and just sort of trying to manage your economies and your grouping. But it's nowhere near got the depth of the family structures of Crusader Kings, but certainly got a much better feel about playing the combat and sort of how that one does actually sort of work. So it's a little bit like Total War mixed with Crusader Kings to a degree, but it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't go anywhere close to what Crusader Kings does in terms of the politics and family structures. But it's not designed to be like that. It's much more of a quick play game. But I played the original. I loved the original game when it came out. Again, back from sort of like a bit of a golden era of gaming when the original Knights of Honor came out. I don't know. Did you guys play that at all?
No, I've heard. I mean, I remember it vaguely, but I didn't play it.
That's the only game I ever bought twice.
Oh, wow.
I played it for so long on my computer, and I absolutely loved it. And then my kids were little at the time, and one of them actually had grubby hands and came in and was playing with the disc. And I've never forgiven them for this. But I don't know what they had on their hands. Anyway, I couldn't get the scratches and things off the actual disc itself. And then when I got a new computer, I couldn't load that game in. And I've been playing it for years, but it was such a good game that I just I ended up going and bought another version of it. My youngest daughter actually had destroyed the disc.
Oh, and now you've outed them too.
Yeah.
Wow.
That reminds me of back in the day when you used to go into like the used CD stores or whatever, and then you'd bring your scratched in disc, and then they'd refinish the bottom of it or whatever, and you'd pay them however many bucks or what. Like they grind off the bottom and re-smooth it or whatever. That's something kids will never have to worry about these days.
Yeah, exactly.
The home remedy, what was it, like nail polish remover or something? I forget.
Yeah, that would smooth it.
I tried that once and it didn't work. Like whatever, $5 or whatever they charge to literally like put it in one of those machines and just sand off the bottom or whatever it does.
But even toothpaste, you could do it. Like I think I was trying toothpaste to sort of just get that really fine grinding to it, and as you say, sort of like trying to get some sort of liquid that will then sort of cover any sort of scratches. But yeah, it just wouldn't work.
I want to move this along just because I have some other questions about this year. So I want to ask, first of all, what was your most disappointing title? And I want to ask this specifically, very selfishly, because I'd love to just mention right now the fact that Superpower 3 even exists is like some kind of, I don't even know how that game came to be. I don't know if either of you played it, but oh my goodness. It is, by the way, I think one of the lowest rated games on Steam of all time. And I had the privilege of playing it right when it came out. And I don't think that... so this is clearly the most disappointing title for me. Wow, what a flop. Oh my goodness. And it's just, nobody has liked it. I think it's got an 8% on Steam, just to give you an idea.
Really? 8%? My God, I've never even heard of it.
Yeah, it's I told you, it's one of the lowest, if not the lowest rated, reviewed game of all time, like with over 100 reviews.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so there you go. Most disappointing for me. If you guys want to try to follow that one. Anything disappointing from you, Das?
I'm looking through my list and no, like I'm looking at just thinking, was there anything that I was looking forward to that didn't deliver? And I really can't think of anything. I mean, of course you're going to pick up, there's going to be games that you don't like, but I've just been like, there's been even little games have been so good this year. Like there's a game coming out next week, which I don't know if you guys have heard of it, called Crawl Tactics. That's actually, I mean, I'm going the opposite of the bad games, but Crawl Tactics is another, like it's a simple little game, but God, it is so damn good as far as a tactical sort of dungeon crawler type game with random content. Yeah, I've really everything. I'm just sort of bouncing from game to game. There was one that I didn't like, Nemesis Distress, which was almost like a real time. I don't know if you guys know the board game Nemesis. It's like based on Alien. And so that's the only game that I really struggled with this year, and it was Nemesis Distress. But what happened was they brought out Nemesis Lockdown, which was a very, very faithful adaptation of the board game, and that's also one of my top 10 games of the year. That one. So I was actually looking forward to Nemesis Distress because I thought, that one, that will actually do what it's, that will be a real-time version of this incredibly suspenseful board game. It really does capture the Alien movies. Feel of not knowing where the aliens are, when they're going to come out, what you get, and then how you sort of manage them. So it's very good in that sense. But the actual real time game, I just really didn't like. And it's sort of, so it was one of that. If I had to pick a game, I'd pick that one. But that's more about me than about the game. Actually, I've got it still in my Steam list. I'll just see what that rates. Does that one? Mostly positive. There we go. So it is me.
Yeah, I just looked it up. 70%. Not bad.
Yeah, and so that's a good rating, but I really struggled with it, and it was a game that I was supposed to cover, but I just couldn't do it because I just was so bad at it, and it was not my type of game. But that was me, not the game. And but Nemesis Lockdown, incredibly good game, same developer, but just a real-time version of it, and I just couldn't play it. I'm not slagging that game at all. Like, I'm just saying that because Nemesis Lockdown I would highly recommend. If you like board game adaptations, Nemesis Lockdown would have to be the best board game adaptation of the year for me. I've covered a lot of them this year, but by far that's been the best adaptation that I've actually played. So yeah, so sort of like two sides of one coin, I guess, for me. Like one incredibly good game and same developer, same genre, same everything, except it was a real time game. I just couldn't play it.
Well, it makes sense why you found it disappointing after the original one being good. So and Tishi, anything disappointing you want to?
I don't know that there was anything that I would say was like overly disappointing.
Oh, you didn't have a number one, so kind of.
If I was going to say anything, I would say like one game I think was worth calling out that was actually, I was really surprised and really enjoyed it, even though it's like, it was pretty limited when it first launched, was Tiny Combat Arena. Like, I felt like there were a lot of little games that like wow, this is really enjoyable. I don't know that anything that would have risen to like, oh, this is the greatest game of the year, but like Tiny Combat Arena was a really fun little game that I was not expecting from Microprose. That's kind of this like almost like pixel art flight sim that was really enjoyable, and I had a lot of fun with.
Great little game, that one. Yeah, it's good.
I'm not sure there's enough there for me to be like, yeah, that's the number one game of the year. I haven't played it recently. I know they've added some stuff.
I stopped playing that when I found Carrier Command 2, to be honest. Like, and that was another Microprose game. But for me, Tiny Combat Arena, like as soon as I sort of came across, and I think it was actually Tortuga who had mentioned Carrier Command 2 to me, that sort of got me into that. Because I think when we were on another podcast, you actually had mentioned a fair few of the Microprose games, and you mentioned like there was some tank trader or something, and I didn't get into that one.
I actually don't like. I didn't really like, what's it called, Carrier Command 2, so it's very funny that we have such opposite views.
I would have listed Carrier Command 2 as my most disappointing game, but it didn't come out this year. It came out last year. So
So neither of you guys like Carrier Command 2?
No.
I just didn't seem to have enough to it. Like it felt way too focused on this is a game about co-op. I think it looks cool, but it just doesn't. It kind of plays a little bit like a dead world. Like there's stuff there, but it doesn't feel compelling to me. And I'm not going to get together with like 8 people to play all the different consoles, very often.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised you liked it so much, Das, because it's so multiplayer focused. My impression is that you are not a big multiplayer person.
I'm not, but it's one of those games where I've played it with some of the people from my Discord server, and that's been fun. Like we've just gone in and it's fun because everyone is going to make mistakes, and so I think if you're playing it to win, you're in trouble. I have enjoyed that, like because it's collegial. You're sort of all together. You're all focusing on different things in the ship, trying to sort of get and do different things with it. But I really, really enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that. It's one of those things where multiplayer can make a game. I mean, I don't think that the single player of that game is fun. I didn't have a good time on the multiplayer, but
single player for me is just as much fun as multiplayer. I've sort of got it a load in a way of playing so that I don't have to play against the enemy carrier. And so all I'm doing is just basically trying to break through into the different islands. And I find that really, really interesting. And that way it's also controllable because it's not overwhelming having an enemy carrier trying to hunt you down. And so I can then really plan every single attack on the islands. And I love that aspect of the game. That's my favorite aspect. So even when I play the multiplayer version, I still play it where I start a multiplayer game, and then basically turn off the other carrier and then just play it. Even on a single player, I still play the multiplayer version, but just with me playing it, and I've really enjoyed that. Like it's as I say, like you're planning. Every single island is different. The way that you sort of then structure your different forces is different. With all the different things, and they've actually just done a big update as well, where they've sort of now got different ways of sort of controlling islands. So no, I think it's a great game. It certainly would be again one of my favourite games. I don't think it came out this year, but I love it. Absolutely love it. I wonder if that's because you guys really do love naval combat and real naval combat sort of much more than what I do. I certainly don't mind a bit of sci-fi and abstraction with that side of things, whereas you guys probably look at it and think, oh, that's not really, that's not the way things would sort of work. I don't know. Is that fair, or is that am I sort of off beam with that?
My criticism is more of just it feels a little bit empty. You got all these different islands and whatnot that you're trying to take, but like I think a big part of what I'm looking for out of a game is whether it's your own creation or whether it's historical, like some kind of narrative, some kind of sense of being part of something bigger. And while like there is a big world, I just like there's no context for any of it. And so it kind of loses me there to some extent.
Yeah, that's fair considering your channel name.
But even if it's like I'm interested in sci-fi stuff, but I don't know.
No, I would agree with the historical gamer here. I mean, this game plays very similar to what's the like Star Trek type like game.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yep, the Bridge Commander or whatever it is.
Yeah, there's Bridge Commander, but there's actually this like third party version of it that is the same thing basically.
Yeah. See, I don't see that. For me, it's much more about manoeuvring your assets into a position where they can sort of combined arms can then sort of carry the island. And I don't know. I really like that aspect. And whether it's single player or multiplayer, I enjoy it equally. Multiplayer is a lot more difficult because you don't know who you really, what the skill set are of the people you're playing with. And so quite often I find that when I do play multiplayer with it, you've got to, you're going to be losing assets that you can't afford to be losing, but then it's sort of fun anyway doing that. So it's sort of, at the end of the day, it's just fun doing it. It's just fun playing it. I mean, if you're trying to actually get a victory from it, it can be frustrating in multiplayer because people will come in that have never played it before, or have played it very, very minimally. And you've just got to roll with the punches, I guess. I'm not very good at it either, so it's sort of, I think it would be not fun to play if you were playing with people who took it seriously. But for me, it's a really, really good game.
Can I also, unrelated, but I want to call one other game that would be on my list if it wasn't still so early in development. I'm really excited about Gunner Heat PC, which is a new tank sim game that entered early access this year. It feels very bare bones. It feels like it's, I wouldn't count it as a release this year, so we'll see where it's at next year. But that was a lot of fun to play for a couple of hours at least.
I've never heard of that one.
It's like a first-person tank game, so it's actually outside of the kind of games that I've been playing. But yeah, it does look interesting. It's basically like the new Steel.
It's a more approachable Steel Beast type.
Yeah, Steel Beast. That's it.
I would say, and certainly better than from a user interface perspective than that Gravitine game.
Well, Steel Beast is supposed to be. You practically have to read the real tank manual. I have a question. Did either of you guys play or look at Farthest Frontier at all?
No.
I'd have to be reminded.
Kind of like a Banished type game. It's real-time strategy where you're managing, just like Banished, you're managing people go and build up your lumber and people farming, people collecting meat and all that. So it's very much in the same vein as Banished.
No, I haven't played it.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good game. I mean, just to throw it out there, I'm basically just listing this as if people haven't heard of that and they're interested in Banished type games, you might like that. Of course, I think that if you're really interested in those kind of games, we did get to play the demo of Manor Lords, and it is awesome.
So there's so many good games coming next year. Next year is going to be just as good as this year. With things like Manor Lords and, the Second Front as well. We didn't mention those sorts of games that will be coming very, very soon. There's so much that's coming next year. Field of Glory Medieval, Field of Glory Kingdoms, the Empire version of that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that game. New DLC for Shadow Empire, really looking forward to that. So we're going to have another incredible year.
Rule Waves 3. Although I'm actually...
Is Sea Power going to come out? Please, guys, please.
Okay, well, let me just try to wrap this up. Is there any titles that we haven't, even just to throw them out there for people who might be interested in games they might be interested in from 2022, or any titles we missed? Oh, I can mention the Pegasus Expedition. I did have a chance to look at that very briefly before this podcast, and it's got a very interesting take on real-time strategy. It's very narrative-driven 4X, which is not something that I thought was even possible, frankly. But it's a narrative-driven 4X game, space game.
That's what stopped me from doing a recording of it. Actually, I've got a couple of games that really should be in the top 10. Certainly close to the top of the top 10.
Yeah, just list them, and people will be interested to hear.
Against the Storm. That's by far the best city builder I've played ever. That's just incredible.
What's that one?
Against the Storm. It's the balance is not quite right yet. It's
this one. Okay, yeah. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
That is I didn't even think about it, but that game is just phenomenal in terms of a city builder. And I keep on trying to record it, but they keep on then bringing out a new beta version of it to play. And so I sort of I scrap it. I've actually recorded, I think, probably about 20 episodes, as in I've recorded 4 or 5 episodes and then scrapped them and then started again, a number of times. And I'll be doing the same thing again with that again but it's just such an amazing game. When you look at it, it looks very cute and you sort of think, it's little animals and, you think think it's not really a serious game, but the characters that are in it actually are used to at least very, very quickly identify what the pros and cons are of your builders and what they're good at and bad at. And that's all that they're really there for. And it's just the whole premise is very, very cool, the way it sort of does work. So that's one that I think is definitely worth playing. What else have we got? The Cruel Tactics, I mentioned that one before. If you're wanting a simple little game to play, like where you can play for 10 minutes and have some fun with it and do like a level, it's the complexity of the actual tactical combat in that is reasonably high, like it's almost like a puzzle game, but it's all procedurally generated, and that's really, really good. There's things like I played Brigandine this year as well. I don't know if that came out before this year, but that's a surprisingly good game as well. This is a Japanese game. Songs of Conquest, that's a great game. There's just so much.
Oh, Songs of Conquest. Was that released this year?
I think so, because they've only just brought out a random map aspect, so you can now play on procedural maps. That's like a Heroes of Might and Magic type style game. You've got all these games like The First Men, Lords and Villains, Clan Folk. There's just so many games that came out this year that they're just too many to actually go and play them all properly. And that's the trouble. Like I've got all these games that I really, really want to rip into and just can't get to them. Even RimWorld, like with the new DLC.
That is the shame, actually, of being a person who records, and like there is some value to releasing content contemporary with the release of the actual title, because there's no reason why a person listening can't go back and play these games. But the three of us are a little bit more, I would say, especially you two, I'm a little bit more free about things I do, but a little bit beholden to covering things when they're released. And if you do happen to have a lot of things piling up with the same release date, you have to pick and choose. Whereas anybody who's just a normal consumer can choose to buy one and then buy the other one 2 months later. We don't really have that luxury.
It's sort of one of the things where it's exciting to actually have all. And these last 2 weeks, I've just absolutely loved it with Dwarf Fortress on the way and Master of Magic and Knights of Honor 2. They're all hitting at the same time. Normally that would be a stressful time because of those 3 games all coming in at once, but I love all 3. So it's just been, it's sort of almost one of those things where it's like, okay, look, I can't afford to do my day job at this point in time. I'm just going to have to keep on playing these games and record what I can, which sort of works out quite well. But there's so many games this year that are exceptional games. It's one like even Flashpoint Campaigns. I haven't played that properly yet.
Oh, right. Flashpoint Campaigns, yeah.
There's so many that have come out this year.
Decisive Campaigns, Ardennes Offensive came out this year.
Yeah, that was earlier in the year. That was very good. That was a very, very good game as well. That's, again, by Vic, the developer of Shadow Empire. But yeah, there's just been such a lot. And there's so many more coming next year as well. Like it's... That's why I think it's we really are in a bit of a golden age again, and that's why I think this is the best year for gaming for decades. It's been incredible. I really can't think of another year that has been just so full of incredibly good games.
All right, well, look, we've had a lot of fun here. I don't think we do podcasts this long very often, which just goes to show you that we must have really enjoyed ourselves. And I really did enjoy myself. So let me just say, Das, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, why don't you just tell folks a little bit about yourself, where they can find you? I mean, you have a kind of a one-man podcast. If people enjoy the things you're saying, maybe tell them where they can find that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, look, I've enjoyed the time again. I always do. I know that I like actually having a difference of opinion as well. Like, it's not as if we're all just saying the same thing. And I do prefer those sorts of conversations where you sort of stretch yourself. So thank you very much for the invite. Again, thoroughly enjoyed talking with both of you again. It's few and far between in one sense. And it's funny because we sort of cover the same sort of genre of games quite often. And there's a lot of us that do that as well. Like, but we don't talk as much as we probably should or could. But yeah, look, I've got my YouTube channel, so it's just youtube.com/DasTactic. And every Monday I have a session called Chat Tactic, where for about 2 hours I just go through the gaming news of that week. Now, I never know what I'm going to talk about when I start, and it's really just more of an interaction with the people who are watching. So it's a live stream, and then people will actually either suggest games or we'll just start to look through the games that actually launched that week. Of course, this week at time of recording, it's going to be all about Knights of Honor 2 as well as Dwarf Fortress. And the following week will be mainly about Master of Magic. But most times it's really just a free-form thing where people come in, mention a few games, and then we start sort of meandering off and seeing what we can find on Google or in Steam or something like that, just to sort of see what's actually going on with games. So I'm surprised that people keep on coming back, to be honest, because I sort of, it's one of those things, I'm passionate about it, but I'm surprised how like that other people are as well. So it's all a bit of an experiment, and so they've been doing that for about half a year now, actually. So that's sort of been going well, and I stream most days on Twitch as well, which is just twitch.tv/DasTactic. So, and I, of course, I upload videos to YouTube. I haven't been uploading as much as what I want to, but I will, now that I've got Dwarf Fortress and Master of Magic and Knights of Honor, there'll be a lot more content over the coming months. But again, thanks for the invite. Thoroughly enjoyed the discussion with you guys.
Well, thanks for coming back on. I had a great time talking to you and talking about some games that I'm not as versed in, and it was an enjoyable discussion. But that'll do it for episode number 60 or 76, our wrap up of the year 2022 in strategy gaming. This is the Historical Gamer, but you can call me Matt. And for Eric, until next time.